rotating savings and credit associations. That's the academic term. But you will find that this practice of an informal community savings collective is practiced all over the world, primarily concentrated in Africa, Caribbean. But essentially, you will find this practice among communities all throughout the global majority. To give some, and known by to continue, and hopefully the construction work has stopped. Um, uh, so we will be talking about ROSCAs. And I think it's important to say that that is the Western academic term for this practice. It is known by different names that are cultural and ancestral to the communities that they're practiced in. And our panelists will speak about those names as relevant to their communities. But just to provide some context to this discussion, I'm really really honored, I would say, to have these panelists talk about ROSCAs, because for me, as a first generation Canadian from Caribbean descent, I've heard of, these collective savings, but lost that knowledge, lost that ability to know how to practice them. And then fast forward to 2022, when many of us are, really trying to overcome some serious economic obstacles to building wealth, wanting to reconnect with this way of community savings within my generation, as a way to build financial solutions building financial solutions that support our communities, being self-reliant and resilient without having to do too much knocking on other people's doors who might not understand our goals. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to our panelists to just do a brief introduction, name and your co-op, and just briefly the work that your co-op does, and then we'll get into this discussion on ROSCAs. So let's start with Jean-Marie.
I'm going to speak in French, and if someone is ready, can translate. Ok, mon nom c'est Jean-Marie Mabaka Lusasu. Originairement, je suis de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis arrivé au Canada en 2015. Et qu'est-ce qui m'a amené dans le mouvement coopératif? C'est que avant d'arriver au Canada, j'avais quelques activités que je faisais au pays. ROSCAs ou tontines, comme on l'appelle en français. Mais ces tontines que nous faisions au départ n'étaient pas de tontines financières, parce que les tontines peuvent revêtir plusieurs formes, dépendant du secteur dans lequel vous voulez travailler. Et moi, j'avais organisé des tontines dans le secteur agricole pour pouvoir permettre d'abord aux agriculteurs de pouvoir travailler. Et puis, ensemble, Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Alors, ensemble, de trouver des voies et moyens de pouvoir réduire le temps de travail et d'aller plus vite dans l'exécution de nos travaux. Alors, on organisait les agriculteurs en groupe de 20. Eux, ils coupaient les champs. D'abord, on leur demandait de faire un champ expérimental pour l'organisation et puis faire 20 champs. Donc, les 20 faisaient à la fois un champ pour 20 personnes. Donc, ils ont fait 20 champs en moins de temps. Et leurs femmes étaient organisées pour pouvoir semer les champs. Et alors, quand je suis arrivé au Canada, lorsque je suis arrivé au Canada, j'ai été buté à un problème financier. Étant nouvel arrivant, j'avais des difficultés de trouver de l'argent pour mon loyer, le premier et le dernier mois de loyer. Et aussi, j'avais des difficultés pour pouvoir payer les frais qu'on m'exigeait pour la résidence permanente. Alors, j'ai réfléchi en pensant à cette expérience que j'avais eue au pays. Je me suis dit, mais pourquoi on ne peut pas s'organiser? Si moi, nouvel arrivant africain, j'ai ce problème, je pense qu'il y en a d'autres qui ont le même problème que moi. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas possibilité de trouver une solution? C'est alors que nous avons pensé à créer la coopérative La Termitière. La Termitière, comme son nom l'indique, a puisé son inspiration des fourmis. C'est-à-dire parce que les termites sont des fourmis. Et vous voyez, les termites travaillent en synergie, en groupe. Et lorsqu'ils travaillent en groupe, ils construisent plus vite. Et leur édifice qu'ils mettent en place est solide et dure très longtemps. Alors, nous avons pensé à prendre ce nom justement parce que nous voulions construire quelque chose de solide, de durable et de pérenne pour pouvoir aider les afro-descendants, les francophones et tous les restes qui avaient des problèmes financiers à pouvoir trouver solution à leurs problèmes.
Merci, Jean-Marie. And now I'll pass it over to Obi and Juliette from BWPW.
Hello? Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Obi Agosiegber. I'm one of the co-founders of BWPW Co-op, which is the Black Women Professional Worker Co-op. So BWP is a registered for-profit co-op in Canada, and we work with our members, Black women, to help them, so women in the agro space and non-agro space, to help them operationalize and scale up their business. And we also provide them with a safe place to thrive, and really grow in their chosen careers and in their businesses.
Yeah, thank you so much. While I'm speaking, you might hear some sound coming from up. Just know that that's part of the process. Don't be distracted by it. And like Obi, I am with the Black Women Professional Worker Co-op based in Toronto. And Obi has really shared like what we do basically, which is working with Black women in the agro-food space to scale up their products and services, but we also provide a safe space for them to organize this collective savings culture. So ROSCA, like Christine said, the academic name, for us, we know it as Isusu. It's something that our grandmothers did, our great-grandmothers, our parents. So it's learning that we got informally, right? And so what we're doing is basically navigating a space where we can create structures for it. so that it can thrive side by side with the formal financial system. And the uniqueness that I bring to this is that I work in the formal financial system as a financial advisor. And so I've been able to see unique ways where we can have both informal and formal working together to better serve marginalized communities and also to educate the formal sector so that they don't see this as something that's alien, but something where we can actually create an ecosystem of this larger, social solidarity economy that we're hoping the post-pandemic world will force us to really consider, because so far the capitalist model hasn't really worked that great. So thank you.
The power of ROSCAs, and we've heard how ROSCAs are being used to empower the communities that you're a part of. And ROSCAs have been this form of informal savings that happens outside of the mainstream system, often because groups have experienced racism and other forms of discrimination and exclusion from mainstream financial institutions. And so ROSCAs becomes that in-community solution. But we've also heard of it as a way to bridge to the formal sector, whether it's French-speaking immigrants to the country who don't yet have the ability to navigate because of language barriers, to navigate the formal system. This becomes a bridge in order to enter that system. So the work that you're doing is very much that bridging. So I'd like to hear from each panelist more about the work that you're doing in terms of ROSCAs as a bridge and what the opportunities and challenges have been.
Okay, thank you for the questions. En fait, il y a un pont réellement entre l'informel et le formel. Dans le contexte de la termitière, nous avons puisé l'idée de la tontine traditionnelle pour pouvoir la rendre beaucoup plus formelle. Parce que la tontine traditionnelle, c'est une forme juste de thésaurisation d'argent. En fait, un groupe de gens, 5, 10 personnes, se mettent ensemble et se prêtent de l'argent à tour de rôle. Et cet argent est remis à tour de rôle à la personne, ou bien ils organisent une réunion et celle qui va avoir l'argent va organiser peut-être un petit repas. Donc il y a une dimension humanitaire pour pouvoir solidifier les relations, pour pouvoir partager non pas seulement les difficultés financières, peut-être les difficultés émotionnelles, les stress et tout ça, ça aide le groupe à pouvoir se rendre beaucoup plus compétitive du point de vue financier et du point de vue de la vie sociale en général. Alors, nous avons dit, puisque cette thésaurisation n'apporte pas une plus-value, il faudra repenser un peu ce modèle traditionnel informel en un modèle formel pour qu'il puisse apporter une plus-value, donc un bénéfice à la personne qui épargne son argent ou qui prête son argent. C'est comme ça que nous avons créé ce que nous appelons la tontine à accumulation. C'est-à-dire, au lieu que la personne puisse prêter chaque mois à une autre un fonds, on lui demande de constituer ce fonds en une fois et ensemble, on le met dans un placement. Puisque la personne peut attendre 5 mois, 10 mois, on lui dit nous le mettons dans un placement pendant 5 mois, pendant 6 mois ou 10 mois pour que lorsque nous le retirons, on le retire avec un bénéfice. Et la personne récupère son capital initial, donc il a un gain en capital, mais il a aussi un bénéfice qui s'ajoute sur le capital. Voilà comment nous avons essayé de faire le pont entre la tontine informelle pour la rendre formelle en ajoutant une plus-value sur ce que la personne n'allait pas avoir. Merci.
Merci, Jean-Marie. So same question for Obi and Julie.
So in terms of bridging, from the informal to the formal, I think for us, how we started is important because we formally registered the Black Women Professional Worker Co-op last year, August of 2021. However, the informal part, in terms of the ROSCAs, I have run ROSCAs since 2010. Quite a number of years, and with different subgroups within our community, and even with Black people. So whether it's the student groups, women business owners, nurses, doctors, like just a wide spectrum. So what the reason why I bring that up is that we have a body of collective learning over the years of what works, what doesn't work, what the gaps are from just doing this over and over again. And so for us, when we formalized as a cooperative, the Black Women Professional Worker Co-op, it was important for us to take first an academic lens to this, right? And so for us, the just discovering the work of people like Dr. Caroline Hussein, that someone had mentioned earlier today, was really pivotal. The work of Jessica Gordon-Nemhard, because they bring that lens that was lacking. They started from studying what had happened, whether it was in the Black movement in terms of civic rights, right? The work of people like Fannie Lou Hamer with Freedom Dreams, of what that really means, this informal system of pulling funds, that it wasn't really about just the financial. So that was important, that it was beyond just financial or economic growth. It was about racial justice. It was about creating a sense of belonging, a safe space where people that were marginalized could come together, right, to create communities of trust. And they were practicing this mutuality that the formal sector talks about, all the 7 principles, right? They were practicing it without giving it a name, and it was yielding results for them. They were able to pull themselves out of poverty. They were able to fight for rights, right? So coming from that lens, when we started in 2010 informally, it was we formed a women collective, Whole Women Network. And what it did was that we pulled those funds together to actually fight gender-based violence. So it wasn't so much pulling the funds for individuals to take the funds at the end of each month, which is the traditional way that ROSCAs, the Isusu system, work. For us, from the get-go, it was about iterating the model, right? Saying, how else can we use this model that our parents, our grandparents have used? How else do we bring more younger people into the mix, right? How else can we use it in such a way that even the formal system is not threatened by it? So you talked about in bridging the gap with the formal system, where the challenges are. So for me, working in the formal system as a financial advisor, it was easy for me to recognize what, for instance, Black immigrants face, and from there, other immigrant groups, in terms of access to finance. So just a typical example, an immigrant family will move to Canada with the promise of a better life. And then that better life is premised on an economic system, a financial system that they have no prior knowledge of, because a lot of communities that they're coming from do not have the formalized credit system. So they go into the bank, and the first thing they're told is, you don't have a credit history. They go for employment, you don't have Canadian history, work experience, right? Every immigrant here, I see people nodding in the, face that. So for us, it was important to say, how do we use the ROSCAs model to bridge that, right? So number one, an immigrant who needed to build credit really fast, needed to be able to get maybe a secured credit card. You need to put the funds down, then the bank will give you a credit card. How do you get the funds if you're new in the country and you don't have a job? there comes the ROSCA. You begin to aggregate into communities, whether it's through faith-based institutions, whether it's through your children's school, where you meet other parents and you're talking about the challenges that you're facing. And so you default to what you know, what was always done in the places you're coming from, because culture travels, right? And so within this formal space, you build your own subgroup. And so that for us was how it started. The same thing with international students. They would come here, and then sometimes challenges with the countries where they're from. Maybe there's a coup d'etat or some, violence or so change in government policies. And so people would not even be able to transfer funds easily, right? Again, we come in as an informal, something that people are familiar with. So their parents back home know about the ROSCAs. And because it's built on trust and reciprocity, right? That's where we started from. How do you build that in a system that's so individualistic, where your credit rating is what talks to the system about your integrity, right? So how do you then bridge that gap? So we started creating from the get-go a system that would speak with a formal system. So the challenges we face when you pull those funds together, sometimes it's a lot of money. So you go to put it in a bank so that it's safe, or the iterations, instead of bringing cash, they send it by email transfers to the banks. So the bank is now asking questions, right? You come into, as of last week, I faced the same challenge. Went into a BMO bank account, and they were like asking me questions. I've had that account for years, but those questions still came up. A manager came, and another manager, what's your name, all of that. And so being able to, instead of the knee-jerk reaction of feeling I'm being marginalized and I'm going to get angry, is understanding that this is a challenge because the financial system doesn't recognize this, and saying, no, I want to have a conversation with someone at the branch because of this experience, and educate them about what this is, and understanding that the credit union is a middle ground to that bridge because they understand cooperativism. And so for us, working with institutions like Alterna then makes sense because you speak the same language of this cooperative world. And so for me, overall, the bridging the gap begins with the awareness that this gap exists because of the system. It's not because people are trying to be mean to you or exclude you. It's just because the system that we operate in has some default settings, and it's everybody's responsibility to share indigenous knowledge, learn about contemporary knowledge, and find the middle ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. There's so much that my mind went into all different directions. We're going to talk about how to do that education with mainstream institutions. But what immediately comes up for me is that education within community. Because when Juliet, Obi, and I, and even Jean-Marie, I've had a chance to speak with them just about the role of ROSCA in community. And in speaking about what's the educational aspect, I mean, for you already, this is indigenous knowledge that has been passed down to you. You don't need to learn how to do this. I need to learn how to do this, right? As again, a first generation Canadian Caribbean background, I know about Susu, I know about ROSCAs, but I don't know how to do them. But my generation, we need to know how to do them. Because when we look at the projects we want to create, and when we look at how are we going to fund those projects, we're coming up against different obstacles. We're coming up against having to write grants that shoehorn our ideas into language that the grantors, who are often predominantly white, so that they understand it, right? We have to present ourselves in ways that are watered down in order for our projects to get funded. And so what excites me about the ROSCA model is you don't have to do that explaining. You don't have to explain to anybody what you're going to spend the money for, right? This is a trust-based system. I found that when I've come together with groups of friends trying to say like, okay, we know the ROSCA model is part of our background. Let's get together and do it. It always fails on that idea of trust. Because we've grown up here and we've been taught to trust the bank with our money, but don't trust each other. And so my first question based off of that context is exactly these characteristics and principles that ROSCAs teach. Because Jean-Marie, Obidjua, you all have stories about this is not just transactional. This is not just about, money changing hands. This is about learning a whole other set of principles that strengthen community. So my first question is if you could talk a bit more about the other benefits of ROSCA, and then I'm going to come back around with a second question.
Merci. Le bénéfice de ROSCA ou des tontines est énorme dans la mesure où, d'abord, il y a cet aspect humanitaire qu'on construit autour du groupe. Et c'est cette confiance qu'on se fait. Hein, it's based on trust. Parce que sans confiance, on ne peut pas se mettre ensemble. Alors, ça brise les barrières qui séparent les gens. Parce que souvent, les tontines ici faites au Canada, ce n'est pas fait uniquement au niveau des ethnies ou de groupes culturels d'où nous ressortons. Parfois, ça se fait même au niveau des enseignants. Par exemple, dans le conseil scolaire, il y a des enseignants qui sont du Cameroun, de la Côte d'Ivoire, du Congo, de Bénin, mais qui travaillent ensemble et qui se font confiance mutuellement parce qu'ils ont déjà bâti une certaine relation humanitaire au sein de leur activité qui est l'enseignement. Alors, cette confiance-là qu'ils se font d'abord par le fait qu'ils travaillent ensemble, les amène à pouvoir chercher des solutions à leurs problèmes. Et comme chaque personne dans son background a une idée de ce que c'est la tontine, ils s'organisent ensemble pour pouvoir se prêter cet argent de façon que chacun puisse pallier au problème de l'autre. C'est-à-dire, c'est comme si le problème de mon frère, parce que c'est le terme qu'on utilise dans les tontines, on ne parle plus de, je ne sais pas, de celui-ci ou de celui-là, mais on parle plus dans le terme de frère. Hein? Is my brother or my sister. Donc, c'est dans ce sens-là que l'on bâtit cette confiance pour pouvoir résoudre le problème de l'autre. En fait, on pénètre même la profondeur, parce que la tontine ne se limite pas au niveau de l'argent comme nous l'avons dit ici. Ça va parfois profondément à connaître quelle est la situation familiale. Est-ce que les enfants se portent bien? Est-ce que ton mari se porte bien? Comment est la famille back home? Donc, c'est tout ça. On traite de tous ces problèmes au sein de la tontine, au-delà du problème financier. Donc, ça ouvre un large éventail de situations sociales qui sont traitées au point que les gens ne sont plus étrangers les uns et les autres. Ils deviennent plus proches. Et ça les pousse à faire encore plus. En cas de deuil, par exemple, ils vont contribuer, pas dans le cadre d'une tontine, mais dans le cadre de pouvoir épauler leurs frères à soutenir la famille qui est éprouvée. Donc, ça ouvre plusieurs portes au-delà de la tontine. Donc, dans le soutien moral, lorsqu'il y a, par exemple, un cas qui arrive ou bien une femme qui vit seule, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de cas comme ça, donc on la soutient au point que dans son stress, comment il peut sortir de ce stress. Parfois, on trouve de voir, on dit, bon, moi je connais tel psychologue qui peut t'aider dans ce cas. Donc, il y a plusieurs situations qui concourent autour de la tontine. Donc, la vie devient comme Donc il y a la sécurité là-dedans, il y a la liberté, il y a l'épanouissement même de la personne. Donc ce n'est pas seulement au niveau de l'argent. La tontine a un aspect beaucoup plus humanitaire que financier.
Merci. Obi, Juliette?
So benefits of ROSCAs, right? I think the ROSCAs come with so many benefits, especially when you're coming from, or you're working with communities that are marginalized or do not have access to funding um, or you know, want to do better and is looking for a way to make the system work for them, right? Like Christine said regarding trust, right? Yes, trust is always an issue because they say when it comes to money, right? When it comes to money, who do you trust, right? Your sister becomes your, will fight, not my sister though, but friends can really will fight you for money for every penny, right? For whatever reason. So I think in terms of Rosker, and that's us wanting to connect it or bring it to the 21st century, right? Where we're not looking to have the legal documents, signed between everybody, right? And I think to even start with, you don't just wake up and do Rosker with anybody, right? You do it with people you trust, right? You do it with people that you have common values, right? So I guess that is where the cooperative principles and values come in. That is where, for instance, BWP, the cooperative principle, the principles and values that we decided amongst ourselves that will be our core principles. That's where they come in, and that's who we will let into the co-op. People that share what we believe and who we are, and common values, right? So it's not just anybody, but even in knowing that we are not bringing just anybody, that legal document, because the 21st century has to be there, and understanding everybody's background, where they're from. So that's also the challenge, going towards formalizing the system, getting those legal documents drawn, and basically all the things that need to be done. But in terms of the benefit is huge. It does raise people out of poverty. I've been a recipient of ROSCAs. We do it in BWP. We've made some money from ROSCAs. So it does work.
So thank you. Is it okay if okay, yeah. So I think I'm going to talk a bit about the benefits that are not financial, right? Because I know a lot of time when people hear ROSCAs or Susu or partner, depending on what I think is tontine. What's it called? Tontine, yeah. So it has different phrases across different cultures. So I focus on the non-financial because it gets lost a lot of times, right? So what are those non-financial benefits? It's the sense of belonging. It's the being able to create a safe space where you can then talk about the bigger issues, whether it's systemic racism that you're facing, right? Whether it's issues around homelessness and affordable housing, whether it's issues around poverty, right? And these issues that I'm speaking about, poverty, health, mental health, homelessness, these are issues that are really, really huge in the Black community, right? And so for us, being able to create a space where groups of people can come together and actually talk about those issues and talk about even political issues and then tie that to how the ROSCA system can be of benefit. An example, we've had one of our sisters run for office out in Brampton, and her funding to run for political office came from a partner system, from the ROSCA. So this is addressing political marginalization. But then when you talk about the economics of it, in a capitalist economy, you need the money to fund that. But how do you rally community around someone and then tell them that there is a way to do this fundraising that's familiar to you and you can be a part of it? So that's one of the bridges, the benefits. Another one, again, I talk a lot about immigrant communities because a lot of us are either first or second or third generation immigrant. And so the settlement process for new immigrants has a lot of gaps, right? And so what we find is there are a lot of very well-educated Black immigrants that are still living in poverty. So if you look at the statistics in Canada, 1 in 4, right? Higher than, like 4 times higher than other groups you find among. So that poverty affects even people that ordinarily you would think shouldn't be affected by it because they have the educational qualification. But no one's doing the work backed with data why that is, right? So we sit on several panels and we hear of all these great foundations talking about monies, even the federal government that's been plowed into the Black community. And so what the questions we started asking is, do you have the data to show us how this money is lifting people out of poverty? And 9 out of 10, when we ask that question, they don't have it because no one is doing the hard work of tracking, of measuring, of saying, how do these systems work? So for us, the ROSCA then becomes a bridge. If you want to talk about economic empowerment, you want to talk about financial literacy, so many banks have financial literacy programs, and we question that. We say, show us the communities that you're working in, that these financial literacy programs are actually lifting people out of poverty. And a lot of them can't show those numbers. And so we come in and we say, the ROSCA model speaks to financial literacy at a fundamental level. You're teaching people how to save for something greater than themselves, being plugged into communities that can hold them accountable. You can layer that on with the traditional, the formal financial literacy programs, where you're now talking about for education, RESPs, for retirement, all these other things. But there needs to be a foundation, an entry point, where the group that you're speaking to understand what you're trying to speak to them about, and they don't feel they're being taken advantage of because it's familiar, right? And then it grows from there. Another benefit that I really want to speak to is for young people and their mental health, right? And also for women and their mental health. In our community as Black people, we have a lot of single parenthood, and that has a multiplier effect on childhood poverty, on cognitive development of children, right? So you're looking at ROSCAs in terms of how even faith-based institutions, non-profit, all these different groups in the Black community are able to pool resources together to address these fundamentals. What is the kind of education that you would give, for instance, a single parent to be able to pull that family out of poverty? How do you pull ROSCAs? I know of communities that pull ROSCAs to provide scholarships for teens in their community, to pull ROSCAs to address at-risk youth, pull ROSCAs to get together mental health professionals and people in the health field to actually create programs, the intervention that's tailored, that are culturally attuned to our communities. And then finally, the benefit of connection without boundaries. And why we talk about that is that for us, BWPW, we work with women in the food space in Canada. But some of those women, the ingredients that they use to create the ethnic snacks and things, even the seedlings, sometimes they have to get it from Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, Ghana, from their family back home, right? And the immigrant story is one of having two souls. You're living physically in one homeland, and then there's a homeland that you've left behind, and all those people. So we create that bridge with the ROSCA, where we're pulling funds together. We're able to give even as loans to these women farmers and producers in those countries, developing countries. And sometimes it's not even sometimes, we don't do it as charity. Because for us, the cultural nuance of charity, of grants and loans is a bit different. In our culture, poverty, the word for poverty is ogbenye. Ogbenye means one whom the community uplifts. It's not a poor person who's lazy. No, it's recognizing that there's a system that sometimes breeds poverty, a system of injustice, of inequality. So it's how does the community come together to lift people out of poverty, to share the resources, right? And so that's what the lens we use. The women that are outside the country, they're part of, how do we lift them out of poverty to where they are producing what we need, they're sending it to us as trade. And because we have an ESG expert on our team, it was really important because principles of fair trade, principles of equity, we wanted that to be across board in our systems, in our processes, in how we hire, what living wage means, in how we compensate for our time, because often marginalized people bear the burden of having to explain the injustices that we face. And then we don't even get compensated for doing that work, right? Like for us to come to this conference, I think something had come up where it was like, oh, you can come and then you have to recontribute maybe what your honorarium. And we said no. No, and that's the conversation. Sometimes it sounds difficult, but no, it is our time. We have to be compensated for it because it is difficult work to come to explain what you're facing, right? And so we're saying, for me, the broader conversation now that I want to end with is for everyone that's listening, both in this room and outside, for us to take collective responsibility for the society we want to build and not put the burden on one group to do that. We must merge the informal and the formal, understand the benefits of both, and then create something better and tighter for everyone. Thank you.
Je voudrais ajouter quelque chose sur ce qu'elle a dit de très important. En fait, le bénéfice est incalculable. Lorsque nous faisons l'analyse de pays en développement, je lisais quelque part, en 2019, la diaspora africaine a transféré en Afrique 48 milliards de dollars. Et ces 48 milliards de dollars proviennent généralement du mouvement des ROSCAs. Parce que ici, c'est ce qu'ils font pour pouvoir soutenir leurs frères qui sont en Afrique. Parce que l'aide apportée à l'Afrique, comme le dit Dambisa Moyo, c'est un économiste zambien, c'est l'aide de la mort, aide. Ça ne rapporte rien. En fait, cette aide retourne avec une plus grande value en Occident. Mais ce qui fait que les pays en développement puissent tenir, c'est le mouvement de tontine organisé dans la diaspora africaine qui va faire du travail là-bas. Imaginez-vous 49 milliards de dollars en 2019. Ce n'est pas le 1/3 de l'aide apportée en une année par l'Occident en Afrique.
Thank you, Juliette and Jean-Marie. I want to loop back around to what you said, Juliette, that ROSCA is not charity. And that's important because with ROSCA, there's a commitment there, right? To the one who the community uplifts. That's a commitment. Because these issues don't go away for us. This is our lived experience. And, that's something that I feel granting bodies, and they don't understand because they work on cycles. So when it's time to pay attention to our issues, because, usually an incident rooted in our trauma makes the headlines, and then the response is, okay, now we'll pay attention and fund you. And going into this, we already know that's a cycle. We know that interest will wane. But with ROSCA, or collectivity in our communities, we don't work on a cycle, you know? And to me, that is the power of ROSCA. And again, so the question I wanted to loop back around with is my generation. Because we're still trying to, it feels like we're bound up in this cycle. And when they want to pay attention to us, they will. And then when they don't, we're scrambling, we're bootstrapping to, you know, we talked a bit earlier about Black entrepreneurship is bootstrapping. And that also extends out into our community building, activism, like so many, we're just bootstrapping because the money isn't there. And to me, that is the power of ROSCA. And my generation, we are not, our first generation, we are not utilizing it. So my next question is about that education. As you spoke about that part of this is important to get young generations involved. So I wanted to hear from each of you, how do we do that work, that education work, so that my generation is, you know, these benefits that you were talking about, and pushing our goals forward and uplifting ourselves. Let's talk about that. What has to happen in terms of educating us? Do you want? Yeah, I'll go to okay. Yes.
That kind of like ties everything together, right? And I think that's why we're here. So first, I really want to give kudos to all the organizers of this event, and even for the topic, right? Because it's so pivotal. I think that's the starting point, the conversations, the wider conversations that we should have. And then going internally within our community, because there's the internal and the external. Within our community, what should that education look like? And why don't we have that education, right? Because understanding why the gap exists will help us. And what has happened is that it is this mindset of my children will not experience the trauma that I experienced. I will teach them something different for the new world. And then we forget to teach them what we know, right? We just ignore that. And so there's a new conversation that's happening within our community of saying, this idea of charity, is it working for us? And it's a radical thought. We're not saying stop charity, in totality, but really looking at it, is it working for us? And if it's not working, this capitalist model of in cycles, there's trauma in the Black community, let's push some funding and some programming and all of that into it. And then after a time, like you said, the cycle goes down and everything is short. If it's not working, what role can the cooperative movement, right? And it's not, I don't look at it as a sector, it's a movement. That whole solidarity economy, social economy, what role can it play, right? There's a lot of roles that it can play. Number one, the education has to start with not waiting for us to come to the sector to explain. It is the sector and the movement being brave enough, empathetic enough, and without ego enough to say, maybe what we have is not working. How do we go to these communities, right? And so organizations like the Canadian CWCF, the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation, I think they're beginning to do really good work around that, because they're asking themselves the tough questions. I'm on the JEDI committee of the and as well as Christine, which is really what we've been doing is not working. We have this list of Black communities and Black organizations, but we're not able to reach them, right? Let's get people, leaders, representative of this community, and ask them, how can we reach them? How can we co-create the education piece? So someone like Christine, for instance, with Freedom Dreams Education, how do we get someone that is that's a leader in that space to co-create with us, so that we're not prescribing to a community solutions, about their problem and their lived experience. That's one. Number two is, how do we ask the right questions? So if a grant-giving organization, for instance, sees a minority group talking about ROSCA, the response shouldn't be, oh, we don't understand this, or this is not legal, or this is not under the cooperative principles and guidelines and regulatory framework, so we won't fund it. The response should be what the cooperators did with their community development program, their grant, because we applied for it and we got it. But how did we get it? In between that process, right, we put in fully open, this is what we do. We started with the ROSCA model, this is how we integrate it. And we were told by other people, oh, if you put this in, they're not going to fund, you know. We're told by other Black organizations that have faced the same thing, that have been told, we don't recognize this, we don't understand this, so we're not going to fund it. So the easier route for us would have been to leave that silent and go with what they know. But as an organization, we have decided that let us be among the people that will challenge the status quo. For others, they might say no to us, but we'll be able to speak to the issues. So we put that in there. What the cooperators did was really pivotal for us, and we acknowledge it on every forum that we're on, because the person in charge of that process asked an important question. They sent us a list of about 14 or 15 questions, difficult questions, drilling down, wanting to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it. And it took us a couple of days. And she gave us that time. She said, I know these are not easy questions, but could you shed more light? And we had to go back to now say, what is the language to explain this in a way? So it forced us to do the difficult work. And again, we leaned on the work of people like Professor Jessica Gordon-Emherd, Dr. Caroline Hussein, to put it in a way that we knew would be like mentally digestible, but still retaining the essence of what we were doing. And so when we met with that grantor, the consultant, it was important to then learn that she had worked in West Africa and was familiar with ROSCA. But she didn't want to give us an easy hand. She wanted us to be able to explain. So that's part of the education, right? The openness, the allow this creativity, allow this exchange of ideas, and then we'll create something that works for all. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So, hello. Okay, great. So answering the question, how do we educate your generation? How do we bring your generation to the table? How do we make them believe that ROSCA is a thing, right? So in the Black community, or let's say in the developing world, right, there's a problem. The problem is that we always know that what we have is valuable. We know that what we have is valuable. At least we thought we knew what we had was valuable. And then, all of a sudden, we do not know what we have is valuable, right? And why? I have to bring in colonization, right? That took away the power of the people, right? And in doing that, right, we forgot that we knew what we knew, we had the solutions. And we looked towards the colonizers to be our solution provider, right? So we lost that sense of who we are and trust in ourselves and in our brothers and in our sisters and what they can offer us. You know, so for instance, your generation here, ROSCA is great. They're like, it's not in the main, it's not mainstream, it's not conventional. The banks will not listen to you, right? So we are depending on the Western world to tell us that it's okay. So right now, we're waiting for the Western world to tell us that it's okay, right? So now we're waiting for the Western world to tell us okay, then our children or your generation will like say, oh, okay, it's okay. Like that has happened to our food, that's happened to our way of life, our medicines, everything. We wait to say that it is okay. It is not okay. Now, how do we solve this? What's the education behind this? The education is knowing who we are. How do we relearn who we are? How do we learn where we came from, who we came from, right? Our roots as Africans, as, you know, where we all came from. How do we relearn that was taken away from us? It has a lot of, it's mentally draining, it takes away, so some of us, we are learning who we are again, but most of our children, they are not. And so because of that, they cannot believe in something that they do not know. They don't trust that you know what you think you know. So now it's going much deeper. Like, remember the book? Yeah, you know the book we read, like China Achebe's daughter? Wanda Achebe. So one of the books she went back to history of one of the communities in Africa, right? Enugu. I'm not from that community, but I read that book, and she took away all the biases, everything. She tried to say, look, I'm going to take away all the biases. I'm just going to go into this community and learn who they are. And she now used their words, used their languages, took away their, in terms of centuries. So when she described, because we do not have, our community does not know what 1905 is. They just know before the white man came. What did we do? Before the illness, when the illness, time of the illness, so that is how she was able to get them to talk and to speak, right? And go down to their gods, right? Into their, how they practiced slavery then, how they did all that, who they were. And so by the time I read that book, and then I saw on the TV, I saw a child, right? A black child, at a community garden, right? And then he started talking in English. And his people were like, speak Igbo, like speak the word. And he starts to be able, I saw him. I didn't just see him as a child. I saw him as a child of a community, from a community. So it was very powerful, knowing yourself, knowing thyself. And in understanding yourself and knowing where you came from, how you are, who you are, you believe in yourself. You get your dignity back. So how do we teach that? How do we go back there?
Decolonizing education,
so,
Christine, that's where you come in.
So it's it's going back there to give people that which was taken away from them. Right. Believe in yourself. Believe that your instincts are correct. Believe that your traditions are correct. Believe that what your ancestors did they're not crazy, right? Because right now, everything. It's amazing, but anyway, that book was so amazing. I can go on and on, but no, I have to stop and give it back to you.
Thank you. Jean-Marie, we've got 5 minutes, but please take the mic, and we'll try to squeeze in some questions after.
Thank you. En fait, le problème tel qu'il est relevé ne concerne pas seulement les Africains ou les Afro-descendants. C'est un problème qui est presque général. Et je crois que même les peuples autochtones vivent aussi ces mêmes challenges financiers. Et cela peut aider aussi, le système de tontine peut aider tous ces peuples aussi à pouvoir sortir des difficultés financières. L'éducation, pour moi, les autres ont parlé de ce que nous, en tant qu'Africains, nous pouvons faire étant donné nos racines, mais je pense que si l'on doit éduquer la génération actuelle par rapport aux tontines, il est important que tous les... Parce que tu as parlé, je crois, dans ton intervention de l'intersectionnalité. Voilà. Il doit y avoir une intersection où et les anciens et les nouveaux se rencontrent. Et cela implique les universitaires, les politiques et tous les agents du secteur social, le mouvement coopératif, pour que cette éducation puisse avoir une effectivité et puisse être probante, qu'il y ait du fruit sur terrain. Je pense que ce ne sera pas seulement le problème des afro-descendants des familles, parce que parfois, dans les familles, on n'arrive pas à tout dire. Merci. Dans 2 minutes, je termine. Donc, si toutes les parties prenantes dans la vie sociale interviennent, on peut arriver à éduquer la génération actuelle.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got the 2-minute mark. 1 minute. Okay. Uh, okay, I'm gonna say that this needs a part 2 because we could do another hour and a half on how ROSCAs are evolving to meet this context, because this is also what we see. So yes, our indigenous and ancestral knowledge has come here, and much like our history on these lands, we've had to evolve, taking the context we're now in, and taking our indigenous knowledge and coming up with a new reality, if I could say, for us to survive and thrive. That would be part 2. But to keep yourselves going in this conversation, please look up bwpw.coop and the ROSCA Plus model, which is an example of this evolution, Le Temetier. Also, I'm gonna uplift MIC, getmic.io. These are young Black men and leading this ROSCA in the digital space. When we talk about bridging those traditional ancestral ways with the modern economy, they're working on that as well. So I'm just going to leave everybody with some material for you to keep looking at, and hopefully we could do part 2 of this conversation at another time. Michael, how's that? Yes. And if you had questions, come up to us later.
Thank you so much. What an insightful morning, an insightful panel. Besides the technical difficulties, we finally got there, people. So we'll be breaking for lunch. Lunch is ready. It is served. It is outside. So we'll be taking an hour and a half. Hazel Corcoran, we heard about some of the great work that the CWCF is currently doing. And she's going to speak to some of that in about half an hour or so. So I would invite you to go out, grab your food, come back in, network, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to get Hazel on the line. We'll make sure that all the sound is okay, and then she can come speak to us. She'll be attending virtually and communicating with us virtually. So thank you so much. I really appreciated this panel.